The Audi R8 is a special vehicle, manufactured to a high level of production quality. Its drivers have high expectations of the vehicle and of service. If the Audi R8 has to go into the workshop, it is important to meet these expectations. Removing and reinstalling the engine requires extensive work and places high requirements on the quality of the mechanic's work. In this film, we hope to give you an overview and a little help in order to fulfill these requirements. In addition, you will receive lots of tips and ideas to make your work easier at one point or another. Caution: this film does not replace the current workshop manual and other service literature. This documentation should take priority at all times. We demonstrate how to remove and reinstall an engine using an Audi R8 from model year 2012 with a V8 engine and R-tronic. Other model years, engine versions and gearbox variants may require some different steps, which can be found in the current service literature. Create a working environment with sufficient space to position items and place the necessary tools and aids ready for use. Your tools should include a sufficient number of sealing plugs from sealing plug set VAS 6122. During assembly, many new parts and servicing materials are required. Make a note of these parts during the removal and ensure that all parts are available during installation. In the Audi Training online portal, you will find a list of parts in the menu for this program. We created this list while making this film in order to provide you with some guidance. Before starting our work, we must first determine the unladen position on the rear axle in order to recreate this position by lifting the axle when installing the anti-roll bar. The rear axle anti-roll bar must be secured to the coupling rods in the unladen position using the threaded connections. This is the only way to ensure that the bonded rubber bushes on the coupling rods are not damaged. To determine the unladen position, measure and record the distance between the wheel arch and the center of the axle. Measure this distance on both rear wheels. Please note, at this point, read out the fault memory of all the control units. One reason for doing so is to provide you with a reference in case there are any entries in the fault memory when you complete the work that are not necessarily a result of your work. Another reason is to give you the chance to rectify any faults within the course of your work. Doing so prevents you from having to perform time-consuming removal work at a later stage. Caution: for reasons of health and safety at work, the fuel pressure in the high-pressure section must be reduced. In order to reduce the fuel pressure, remove the fuse to the fuel supply system while the engine is running. Then, start the engine and allow the engine to idle. In the Vehicle Diagnostic Tester, select the measurement value for the fuel pressure in order to observe the reduction in pressure. The fuse can then be pulled out. If the pressure reduces too slowly, you can speed up the reduction in pressure by gently pressing on the accelerator. Please observe the notes in the workshop manual. It is then time to fit the protective covers. Please note, to avoid damage to the paintwork, it is advisable to protect those areas that are not as well covered by the protective covers using additional adhesive tape. Caution: as refrigerant lines will later be disconnected in the course of the work, the refrigerant circuit must be drained as described in the workshop manual. Caution: the rear lid should then be moved into the service position, In doing so, make sure that the ball heads engage completely and that the collets at the top and bottom are tightened up to the stop in order to secure the ball heads. Remove the engine compartment trim on the left and right. To remove the side blades, the fastening for the tank cap manual release must be detached on the right-hand side. One of the two securing bolts can be found behind this trim panel. Please note, in order to prevent damage to the cover when removing the trim panel is drilled through at this point. The trim panel can then be pulled off easily without damaging the cover. The screws can then be released. The screws are held in the adjusting elements by small springs, and it may not be possible to grip or remove them using the magnetic force of the screwdriver. In this case, a strong gripping tool will help to pull out the screws. Depending on the version, the side blades are either glued onto the air intake grill along the whole length, or just along a small length at the bottom. The adhesive bond is removed using removal wedge 3409. The tank cap must then be opened briefly. The side blade can then be removed by carefully pulling it in the direction of travel. First, remove the electrical connector for the tank cap locking mechanism, pull out the manual release cable, and then disconnect the water drain hose from the drain pipe. Seal the drain pipe and the fuel filler neck. Next, siphon the hydraulic fluid out of the power-assisted steering reservoir. Make sure that the sieve in the reservoir is not damaged. Remove the rear wheels on the left and right. Caution: if ceramic brake discs are fitted, the wheel must not fall onto the brake disc, as they would be irreparably damaged as a result. Use both a long and a short mounting pin to guide the wheel. Please note that these mounting pins will protect against scratches on the wheel rims and brake calipers, even if there are no ceramic brake discs fitted. The trims on the underbody and the wheel housing liners can then be removed. These trim parts play a major role in cooling the engine and the exhaust system in particular. At high vehicle speeds, great forces act on the trims, which is why they are attached securely. During installation, all the screws must be refitted in the correct positions. In order to do so, we have put together a little aid that should make it easier to fit and assign the screws. Of course, the screws must have been fitted correctly after any previous repairs. To remove the bumper cover, the middle section must first be dismantled. The top fasteners at the side and the 3 flange bolts are easily visible and easy to reach. The 2 middle screws of the 4 lower screws are only accessible after the number plate lights have been removed. If a reversing camera is installed, the connectors must first be disconnected and the wires exposed. You are then able to remove the bumper cover. There are two slightly hidden securing bolts located behind the air intake grille on the left and right. These screws can be released using a long Torx T30 bit. The screws are held in place by a clip in the bore of the bumper cover. Please note, it is important to work particularly carefully on these mounting points in order to avoid damage to the clip. Caution must be taken because it is very difficult to replace this clip. The side fastening of the bumper cover can then be released from the wheel housing. Remove the two screws on the left and right of the heat insulation and remove the flange bolts from below. Then, release the fastener on the side panel. Here, you will find two flange bolts on each side that connect the bumper cover to the side panel. Make sure that the dowel pins are not damaged when removing the bumper cover. Finally, remove the screws behind the number plate or the number plate carrier. Here, the fastener used differs slightly depending on the country variant. Before the bumper cover is removed, first pull out the plug to the aerial. Then, pull out the connector to the vehicle wiring harness. Next, remove the impact bar. A photo of the installation position of the wiring harness and the cable ties will make it easier to reassemble the components correctly later. Please note that the cable ties shown here are particularly heat-resistant. Heat-resistant cable ties can be found in the genuine parts catalogue. Please note, in order to avoid any damage to the loose end of the wiring harness, it should be attached to the side panel using a cable tie. The impact bar is removed together with the two lower heat shields. First, remove the screws for the heat insulation on the silencer. Then, release the heat shields from the body and the heat insulation to the exhaust system. Next, remove the tail light clusters. To do so, first remove the perforated sheets. The air filter housing is removed together with the air mass meters. Seal the intake ducts. The rear member is removed together with the rear spoiler. To do so, the rear lid lock is unscrewed along with the lock carrier and put to one side. Release the fastener for the heat shield and remove the three fitted bolts to the rear member. The vehicle frame can be spread apart slightly using door tensioner VAG 1438. In order to prevent damage to the paintwork on the vehicle frame, position two wedges, such as T10039/1, under the clamping tool. Otherwise, use another appropriate means of protecting the paintwork. Caution: the vehicle frame may only be pushed apart by a maximum of 1 mm. The next step is to completely drain the engine oil. As the oil filter housing only drains when the oil filter is pulled out, the oil filter is removed at this point. The oil filter should then be replaced, as the engine oil will also be replaced when the engine is reinstalled. Next, remove the front passenger seat. It is best to remove the sill panel trim at this point. Doing so will make access to the electrical connectors of the seat easier and reduce the risk of damaging the sill panel trim when lifting the seat out. First, remove the two rear screws of the seat rail. Then, remove the two front screws. Caution: please observe the procedure and safety information for work on pyrotechnic components. Before disconnecting the connector to the side airbag, the battery must be disconnected with the ignition switched on. Be sure to prevent the battery terminal from unintentionally touching the cable clamp. Caution: before handling pyrotechnic components or any of their parts when working on the vehicle, you must first be electrostatically discharged. After disconnecting the airbag connector, couple airbag adapter VAS6281 to the seat wiring harness. Then remove the following trims and parts: the A-pillar trim, the C-pillar trim, the back panel trim, the side trim, and the mid-range and treble loudspeaker. The engine gearbox wiring harness and the battery positive wire are then exposed. In order to ensure that all components are correctly reinstalled, it is advisable to take photos of the relay configuration and assignment, as well as the position of the relay sockets in the relay carrier. The correct assignment of the relay sockets and fuses is particularly important in order to ensure that the appropriate relay space or fuse space corresponds to the circuit diagram or other service literature. You are then free to remove the wiring harness. The fuse holders must also be disconnected from the fuse carrier. As in the case of the relay carrier, the installation position must also be noted at this point. The engine gearbox wiring harness can then be completely exposed. Remove the plug, control unit, and release the earth wire. When cutting through the cable ties, make sure that no wires are damaged. Care must be taken, as it is very easy to cut through a wire. The positive battery cable must then be released at the front of the main fuse box and exposed along the sill panel. Push the grommet of the positive battery cable outwards without damaging it. One of the next steps is to drain the coolant. To do so, open the cap on the coolant expansion tank. Then, remove the prop shaft. During installation, the joints must be fitted back in the same position with regard to the axle flanges. As a guide, marks in the form of coloured dots have been provided by the factory. If these marks can no longer be seen, mark the position of the joint and flange. Doing so will enable you to align the two components correctly during assembly and will prevent an increase of imbalance. We always want to improve our programs. Please send any suggestions, improvements and suggested topics you may have to audi.service.tv@audi.de.